Okay. Yes, we're live. Awesome. I am going to give everybody a minute or two to get over here. We've just been over in the Discord, and I've answered a bunch of questions over there. If you either aren't in my Discord or you're watching this later, you can find me on YouTube. You can search Author Amy on YouTube, or you can go to Linktree/Author Amy and find my YouTube channel and subscribe there. And both lives are going to go up. So if you miss either one, or you only get a part, you can listen to it later. Hey, Tessa, Nikki, so glad to see you guys. I'm sorry I'm a couple minutes late getting in. We were chatting. And I was having fun answering questions. I have a ton of questions still left to answer. If you want to know the stuff that we covered so I won't be covering this in the Facebook Live because we covered this in the other one, so you can watch it later on YouTube. We covered the world of Thana, how I chose the animals, what the story was, about how this whole book came to be about, which was kind of cool for me and fun, especially if you're a King of Beasts fan. We covered things like why the wolves can talk telepathically, what the difference was between the ancients and the chimeras and stuff like that. We talked a lot about Ernie and Patty, and the females and the males that were either left or that went through at different times and places. Anyway, so we covered a bunch of kind of the world and different things. Hey, everybody's coming in, yay. We covered a bunch of things about the world and different people and different characters, and how their story ended, or some stuff outside of the story. So if you want to know about that stuff, you'll need to watch the Discord that's going to be on my YouTube channel. The rest of the questions we're going to answer here today. The giveaways are going to be different. So what we're doing today, I believe we have Mary and Janelle and maybe Michelle as well. What I'm going to do today is I have established a secret group on Facebook called Amy's Cohorts. This is going to be the place that I'm going to use when there's extra content or secret content or unpublished content, because I need to keep that really locked down. So if you're attending today on Facebook, you are going to be given access to that group. You're going to receive that hopefully in a private message. If you weren't already in the Discord group, I already have you in the Discord group, and it's the same content going in over there. So if you want to be in both, you can, but you don't have to be. But if you weren't in the Discord group or you want to be in both, please throw a comment into the chat here and just say, let me in, or I want to come, or whatever, so that the mods can add you to, it's a group called Amy's Cohorts. There's no content in there yet, because I wanted everybody to get it at the same time. In about 3 hours, the epilogue for Dark Alpha will go up in there, and then half an hour after that, there's some extra content that nobody knows about that's going to go up in there, and also on the Discord. You guys are going to get to read it for free, and you're going to get to discuss it in the rooms that you're in, because we can't talk about that stuff in the normal reader chats because other people haven't gotten to read it. So I'm excited. I'm super excited to see what you guys think of this stuff. I'm waiting to see. I hope you like it. It's not, well, anyway, no, I'm not going to get any clues. Yeah, I would love this evening, if you have a chance to read it, I would love to hear what you think and see if it's exciting to you as it is to me. I guess we'll see. But yeah, if you want to be in that group, put a chat comment, the text comments in here, say, let me in, something along those lines, so that the mods, they're going to click on your profile and send you a private message that's a link. It's not a, what do you say? It's not a scam. If there's any issues today, because this was all kind of, it's difficult to administrate this stuff. So if there is any issues and you don't end up getting a link, please be in touch with me. I can go back through the comments and make sure that you were here. If I didn't see you personally, it's not a big deal. I'm happy to find out and make sure that you're supposed to be in there. So yeah, don't be scared. I'm going to 2 or 3 or few times as we go through these questions, I'm going to just say, hey, if you're new, because here's the thing. I don't care if you're here for 5 minutes or 2 hours. As long as you showed up today, you should get access to that room. You should get access to that material. So if you're only here for a few minutes, or if you end up having to leave, before you go, send a comment in the chat that says, let me into the room, so that we know and can make sure that you're added to it. Okay. There's going to be, and your entry to that room is also your entry to the giveaways. So I have a bunch of stuff. I have some cool and fun stuff. And some of you will have seen this, and some of you will not have. I'm going to show you, there's a bunch of different things. So I have, these are actually a couple of the paperbacks that were originally giveaways at Christmas. They are only the free chapters, so they're not very thick. Let's see, there's like 70 chapters, I think, from the original Dark Alpha. So this is the material that was written before the book started publishing. It was stuff that I was doing as a giveaway for Privilege early on. I still had a couple of those left. I'm allowed to give away the ones that I already had printed. I'm not allowed to make anymore. I have Wolf Post-it notes. I have Zev journals. These are just empty journals, notebooks that you can use however you want. Funny story with the images that you guys got to choose from and why those ones. I have a couple of the hardback Thana journals. So these are not marked in any way to do with either naked males or Zev in particular. Excuse me. So they're just empty little journals that you can have. I have one. There was one person who bought the Privileged tier back in March when I was still allowed to do the paperbacks, who ended up wanting to switch because they had already gotten something, I can't remember. Anyway, they asked to have a Queen paperback instead of the Zev. So I have literally one paperback left, and I'm going to be drawing, and it was already printed. It was printed for the Privilege one that I had permission to do. That's the only one, and it's for the first volume. So just so you guys know, if there's ever any author that's offering a paperback, it's never the whole book unless the book is really short. Web novels are several series, several book series of web novel. So this one, which is very thick and the type is really small, this is volume 1 of, so it goes up to, in fact, it's not even the whole first volume. It goes up to the Solitude. So you get some of the Solitude, I think, or most of the Solitude. So yeah, so lots of stuff. I think these are so cute. It says, just a girl who likes wolves. And I just thought those were adorable. So I have a pair of those to give away. And yeah, I will tell you now, why not? If you haven't already seen it in the reader group, before I started writing on web novel, I was traditionally published twice. But those books, the rights to them, because this was all years ago. The first one came out in 2014 and the second one came out in 2016, I think it was. And they were not linked. They're not connected to each other. But they're YA. I was a dark YA romance writer. And those books, the rights to them got reverted to me earlier this year, but there's a whole process that you have to go through to recreate the book. And my husband's at my window. Anyway, these are author proofs. I have 3 of each that I'm going to give away into one each in the Discord Secret Squirrel Room, and 2 each in the Facebook Amy's Cohorts group. And that's just for fun, really. These are not in any way connected to my web novel romances. They are different. I'll just say, if you're a person who, I'm trying to think, if you read, like the book Speak, or like if you were reading YA back in the 2010s, you'll like these. But they are what's called magical realism. So they're set in the real world, but there's one sort of fantasy or magical element in the main character. I will let you discover the rest. These are now, as of today, literally as of today, these are now available on Amazon in Kindle book and also in paperback. So I'm going to give a couple away, but the rest of you, if you want them, you can buy them. And if you don't want them, I won't be offended because they are different. They are romances, but they're YA romances. They're different to what I've been writing on web novels. So I totally understand if they don't appeal. They are quite dark, but they're dark in the teen realm as opposed to, we're not talking dangerous CEO territory here. Not quite, although one of them gets a little bit close. So lots of exciting stuff, and I'm really glad you're all here. Thank you for coming. We had just gotten, at the end of the Discord chat, we had just covered who was still left, or the Chimera, or anybody that was still left, or where we didn't know where they ended up. So we had covered Ernie and Patty and any males and all that sort of thing. So what I'm doing is I kind of grouped questions together, and the types of questions or the things that they were about. And I'm just going to go through them one by one. This is the disadvantage to being on my phone as opposed to on my computer like I was last time. I'm not going to see the chat, I'm afraid. Oh, you know what? Maybe I can bring it up on my computer. Maybe I can talk while I'm doing that. I'll see if I can. But in the event that I can't see you live, if I am going to go back through it later, I will go back through and read and see what was going on. So if there's questions in there that I didn't catch, or if you didn't end up getting the invite into the room, I'll make sure that it happens. You just might have to be a little bit patient with me. But let's get into our first question from the Q&As. Where do we start? Oh, okay. So I have this question once or twice during the book. And then I had another person that asked me when I came and said, guys, what do you want to know now that the book is over? So I believe that the people that asked this question during the writing of the book don't feel this way anymore because they didn't bring it back up. But maybe you do. I don't know. Why did you give Lars a female who didn't really want him? I feel like he drew the short straw. So I'm sorry if you feel that way. I really am. I feel like Kiel got a really bad rap, honestly, from the beginning because of the role that she played and because of the desire that she had for Zev and stuff like that. I feel like it was a disadvantage to you guys because we never went into her perspective, because she was never a narrating character. You didn't get to see her drivers and you didn't get to see her thoughts. So you were always sort of perceiving her based on somebody else. And now looking back, I can see that hurt her in people's eyes. It was necessary in the writing because if we'd had her perspective, it would have diluted a lot of the tension. There wouldn't have been any question about the fact that she wasn't going to try and steal. She was genuine with Sasha when she went to Sasha and she said, look, I tried, and he said no, and now it's done. That was real for her. She really, she had her shot. She took her shot. It didn't work. And as far as she was concerned, that meant that they were meant to be together. So I felt bad that a lot of people thought she was going to be this like closet villain, on the side, still trying to break them up and stuff like that. She never was ever intended to be that. But she also, the type of personality that she is, she's not as, she's much more closed off. She's much more reserved. So you didn't get to see her warmth really until she was with Lars, at which point, hopefully this question is resolved. But I think for some people that they kind of held on to that, because that was a reality of, she's a much more reserved and unexpressive person. She's had a lot of trauma in her own life and a lot of letdowns. So, she's a lot more sort of careful and self-defensive. But she does that in a sort of, I don't want to say cold, like mean, but just unemotional. She has a way of carrying herself that's very, I would say chill, but it comes off as, you know, like resting bitch face. She's just the person that nobody really wants to mess with. Her feelings for Lars are very real, and there's no doubt in my, like, I knew that they were meant for each other, so I was really excited to get them together. But I understand why people felt like he deserved better because of how it started between them. Somebody, and I don't remember who it was, somebody very early on in the comments, when it became apparent that this was the direction we were going, somebody said, oh, she would have mistaken Zev, you know, as her mate because the scent would have been similar. And there's some truth to that. Like, I always kind of imagined that there was a little bit of confusion for her, but also blindness too. Like, because Zev was the first one that she sort of developed a friendship with, she got to know Lars through Zev. Even though she and Lars actually, by the time Zev returns to Thana, she and Lars are more comfortable or closer to each other than she and Zev were. But she doesn't realize that, because with Lars, very comfortable, and it's there's no real tension to it for her, which is a really healthy place to be. She was just herself. She's just doing her thing, and he's her guy, and he'll help, and she just was always really confident of him. With Zev, there was always that tension that we can have where we're not sure about a person, and that can feel quite thrilling in real life, even though it's hard, and even though we think we don't want it. It can be quite sort of motivating to people. And I always imagined that for her, she mistook that sort of tension that she had on the unrequited side with Zev as something more exciting, or more, I don't know, just something that drew her. Whereas the truth was, the reason she was so comfortable with Lars, and the reason that he had from the beginning been a very easy friend, when she doesn't make friends easily, is because he was the right one for her. So I never felt like Lars drew the short straw. I felt like their journey to get there was rough, and it particularly rough on Lars, to be fair. But also, I mean, I hope that it came through once she kind of got out of her own head and realized where she was really at, that she was all in. Like, as far as she's concerned now, you know, the Zev thing is ridiculous. Like, she would never go there. I hope that came through. I hope you guys felt that. But yeah, I don't feel like he didn't deserve her, or she didn't deserve him. I feel like it was just a really rough road for them. So I hope that you're not disappointed. I'm sorry, I don't remember, because I had that question a couple different times. I don't remember who specifically asked it. But I do want to say that Kjell and Sasha were true allies too. There was some conjecture a couple of times whether Kjell's motives were kind of either to take some of Sasha's control or anything like that. Kjell she never wanted to be alpha of all. Like, that was never her goal. And she was really happy to see Sasha in that role, and really happy to support that. Like, she knew that she was in the right place for her. I never felt like she was very mature in the way that she looked at stuff. So she was very much like, this is my role. This is what I'm here to do. I'm going to do it. And you guys can, you know, deal with it. So that could make her come off a little arrogant at times, but yeah, I love Kjell, and I feel like she got kind of a bad rap, so I feel bad for her. She also was very deeply wounded by the things that happened to her at the hands of the humans, and the different experiences she had, and the people she lost and stuff like that. And she kind of carried the can on the female side when they sent her back and she couldn't have offspring. That was really tough. Like, she really carries some very serious wounds. And I love that she chose to turn that into a strength instead of a victimhood. But yes, so whoever commented on the book that there was a scent similarity. There's truth in that. There's a genetic, the sort of the foundation of Zev and Lars's sense are the same, but then there's obviously uniqueness between the two. But I do think that was part of the confusion for Kjell. Another question I got more than once was whether Nick was a good guy or a bad guy. So, oh, right, I forgot to do my disclaimer at the beginning. Last chance. If you have not, if you're here, or if you're listening or watching this later and you haven't read the end of Dark Alpha, it's going to be spoiled for you. Like, we're going to discuss in detail the things that happen at the end. And personally, I don't ever want to see somebody know the ending before they read into it, but I get that for some people that's what you have to do. So I'm just warning you. If you're somebody who doesn't want spoilers, you don't want to be here if you haven't finished reading the book. Is Nick good or bad? Okay. Nick is the most ambiguous character I have ever written. And it was a ton of fun to do it, I have to say, but very challenging. I knew once I decided to bring him into Thana, I knew that I was always going to have that question mark over his head. That was my goal. And that was, I mean, call it a, what do you call it? It was a challenge I set myself. It's actually very difficult to write a character who is not clearly good or bad, because you have to really dig into their motives in every given moment. And the thing with Nick, if you've read the ending, you know, he genuinely cared about Zev. He genuinely wanted, you know, he didn't have a desire to hurt. He's not a sadist. He didn't have a desire to hurt anybody. He wasn't out there getting his jollies by, you know, experimenting on animal-human hybrids. Like, it wasn't like that for him. So he's not evil. He's genuinely not evil. But he is messed up. Like, he's seriously messed up. And part of that's his own story and his own trauma from when he was young and coming into this realm of powerful people, many of whom are actual psychopaths and lack a great deal of empathy. So he was not in a healthy environment. He was the kind of person who could have gone either way. And to be not in a healthy environment, but have this pull to protect and defend somebody else, what Nick actually was doing all of Zev's life, really, is that his sole purpose or his sole core driver was to keep Zev safe. And if that meant hurting something Zev loved or someone Zev loved to keep Zev safe, he would totally do it. Like, he did not have a balanced perspective. A couple people said, did he actually kill Nathan at the end? Yeah, totally. Like, Nick is screwed up. There's parts of him that don't work right. And he has, it's not that he has no empathy. It's not that he has no feelings, but he's not connected to other people in the way that you and I might be. So he doesn't watch a kid get hurt and go, ooh, you know, he doesn't have that gut visceral reaction. He has to care about somebody for their wounds to matter to him. And once he cared about Zev, he didn't really have the capacity to balance caring about Zev and caring about Sasha at any point where he thought that it benefited Zev, in his mind at least, for something to happen. He wouldn't really care less what happened to other people. He would just go for it. So that's why he says to Zev at one point, right at the end there, yeah, I had to let all of those other people get hurt or all of those other things happen, because if I didn't, they wouldn't trust me. And if they didn't trust me, I wouldn't be here to help you. So to him, you know, as far as Nick was concerned, it was very simple. Well, I had to do that, because if I didn't do that, I wouldn't be able to do this. So, you know, he didn't have that natural kind. He's not a kind person. He is protective, and he's not a sadist, so he doesn't get a kick out of people getting hurt. He doesn't watch somebody get hurt and think it's funny. He just doesn't care, unless he has a connection with them, which he did with Zev, and over time developed care for Sasha as well, and absolutely cared about Zan's future. 100%. As far as Nick's mind was concerned, Zan was essentially an extension of Zev, and whatever we need to do to keep this kid safe, we're going to do it. So Nick put himself in danger a lot, like a lot, to achieve the things that he achieved. So in my mind, he's a good guy in the sense that he's willing to sacrifice his own comfort or his own well-being to help Zev, who he cares about. But he's not a good guy because he will allow terrible things to happen around him or even be part of terrible things happening. As long as to him it's justifiable, he doesn't care. And I think that there's a lot more people in the world like that than we realize, and a lot more leaders in the world like that than we realize. It's not that they're like, yay, let's go cut some kids up. You know, they're not evil. They're not sadists. They don't enjoy pain. It's that whatever they are, what do you call it? So single-minded in their goal that the rest of the means to the end, right? That was kind of the phrase, not just for Nick, but for the team and the board in general that I had, was it's the means to the end. No one went out desiring to hurt people or hurt Chimera. They weren't enjoying the negative effects of the work that they were doing, but they were 100% ready to let it happen because it got them where they were going. From their perspective, as long as we're getting there, it's worth it. That was basically how they thought of it. And I think that there's a lot of people in this world that think that way, and it's really sad. But anyway, so to my mind, Nick is a good guy, but he's not a trustworthy guy, because unless you know his deepest motive, you can't be certain that what he's doing is what you think he's doing. He's incredibly manipulative, especially with words. I am a former alcoholic and liar to the extreme. I used to be a very, very good liar. And the thing that over time I developed was an instinct for how you can use words to make people hear what they want to hear. And I now have a serious radar for manipulation, because that, without realizing, it was very subconscious for me. It was when I was very young. But without realizing it, I had learned how to technically tell the truth, but actually be lying, because I knew how, by phrasing things in a certain way, or just using what people naturally, because I knew them and I knew what they wanted or how they thought. I knew how to say things in a way to get them to think about it the way I wanted them to think about it, not exactly actually the way it was. And that was what to be completely honest, that was how I built Nick. Like, he understands how people think and how to make them do or think what he wants them to do or think. So most of the time, he's more than once in the book, he says, I don't lie, or I hardly ever lie. And that's true. Every time I had him in dialogue, I had to think, how can he phrase this in a way that it's true, but they're going to hear something different out of it than they're not getting the whole truth from him. And if you go back, if you're a rereader and you go back, pay special attention to how Nick phrases things or how he answers things. Because manipulators do things like answering questions with questions, answering questions with sarcasm, stating things very simply so that all of your assumptions kind of come along with it. So when he gets asked a question, he'll answer the question, but he'll often answer very short and sweet. And it's because if he gives any more information, you're going to start to understand that there's more to the picture, and he doesn't want you to. So he'll just tell you exactly what you asked. And it's hard to explain. It's a lot easier to show people when it's happening. Like, I'm in conversations a lot with women, and I'll say, hey, that thing that was said right there, that's super manipulative. Because they're playing on your desire for this, or they're knowing that you're going to assume that means this. A really good example, and then I'll move on. I overheard a conversation between a man and a woman, and the man had been unfaithful, and they were living apart, but trying to mend their marriage and get back together. And there was a task that he needed to do. But at the same day that he was supposed to do the task, he also wanted to go on a motorcycle ride. And I heard his wife say to him, you need to do this, right? And his response was, I would rather miss the motorcycle ride and get that done than upset you. That sounded to her like, I'm going to go do this. I'm going to do this thing that you want me to do. That was how she took his response. But what he actually said was, I'd rather miss my thing than upset you. He didn't actually say, I'm going to go do the thing, right? And I caught it because that's how I used to communicate with people. That's how I used to, and I had since then been around a lot of addicts and drunks and stuff. People with addictions learn to be very manipulative. And as soon as he said it, I was like, he didn't actually answer the question. But I didn't say anything to her at the time. And this was one of the times that I learned sometimes you need to speak up and say things to people. I assumed wrongly that she saw that he hadn't actually sort of really clarified and answered the question. She got super upset the next day when he didn't do the thing and he went off on the ride. And I was like, and she's like, he said he was going to do it. I said, no, he didn't. He didn't actually say he was going to do it. He said he'd rather not upset you. He'd rather miss the ride than upset you. He never actually said he was going to do the thing. And it was this light bulb moment for her. And I was like, so wait, so people really don't get that this is how people do it. So anyway, I'm going on long talk, but it was really, for me, it was a real challenge and it was a lot of fun and very interesting to get Nick to communicate in ways that were truthful, but not honest. That's how I would describe him. He very rarely lies outright. He does do it sometimes. There's sometimes when it's unavoidable and he will do it. He had to do it to get himself positioned to be in the labs with Nathan, with Zan. He had to lie. He had to do a lot of things in those weeks leading up to when Zev and Sasha arrived. But as a general rule, Nick won't lie. He'll manipulate. He'll twist his words so that he can make people think they're hearing what they want to hear. Watch out for this stuff, you guys. This stuff's real. People do this, and especially people that have any kind of addictions or sort of compulsions. They use language in a way, you have to listen to what they're actually saying, not what they want you to think, if that makes sense. You got to try not to listen through your filters. You got to try and actually identify what they have and have not committed to. Because most people who are good liars, they're not telling you bald-faced lies all the time. They're just using words in this really clever way. Anyway, moving on. Are the team in Thana, this is a big, spoiler alert. Are the team in Thana the same scientists as the ones at the end of Taming the Queen of Beasts? So, sort of. If you go back, or if you were in the Discord chat, or if you go back and listen to it later, I talk about how this, I'm just going to make a note because I just saw a question about the second portal. And so if I don't come back to that, remind me, because I do want to explain that. If you go back to the Discord, we talked about how this story started, how this story actually began, the conception of it. It was originally going to be Laren and Suli's story. When I first started to develop the world of Thana, it was going to be a world that was discovered by Laren and Suli when they went off by themselves. They were going to discover the second gateway, which is a traverse, an actual traverse. The traverse was going to take them to Thana, although they would not know that. And they were going to discover this other world. And that was how the characters came to be. That was how the world of Thana came to be, was that it was conceived that way. That was going to be the book that would bridge between king and queen. And it would kind of, you would see Laren and Suli discover this place and become a part of it in a way. And then it would connect with the end of Queen. But there was a lot of reasons why that changed, and you can listen to the Discord about why I didn't end up going with that at all. So Thana got changed a little bit, but the connection was there, right, in my mind. But when I first started writing this version, there was no anima connection. What I conceived, or what I thought, how I put it together in my mind at the beginning, and what I'd said in the comments right from the beginning, that they happen at different times, right? So Zev exists in our world, in our terms, on our timeline. Zev exists decades after Taming the Queen of Beasts. The reason Zev exists decades after is because when Queen ended and the Traverse was closed, and the scientists that were around at that point could no longer get into anima. Most of them had died or disappeared because they'd all gone on this thing, right? But the research, so to speak, was carried on by other people. So you're talking a generation or two later when Zev and his crew are doing their thing. So they're not the same people, but they're coming from the same place. So these scientists know that chimera are possible, or believe that chimera are possible, because they were connected to the people that discovered anima, or actually there was a whole history between humans knowing of anima and that whole thing. But the people who actually tried to capture the anima, bring them into the human world, and were defeated, what was kind of left of the shreds of that whole story developed into what you see in the human world in Dark Alpha. So because, to my mind, they happened so far apart, they weren't going to actually connect. When I first started, I told you right from the beginning in the synopsis, I said there's going to be Easter eggs. And what I had planned to reveal at the end of Dark Alpha was that there was a connection, and you were going to see that the human world side of it, you were going to better understand what had happened after Queen and see what it became, which is Zev's world in Thana. But then when I realized, I started playing with the whole time thing in order, it was a combination of reasons why that needed to happen for this story. Primarily to solve some story issues, but also because I needed Sasha to be able to go and find another space, but not have it known that she had done that. And the only way that that was really possible was if the gateway could time travel, but only backwards, only into the past, only into things that had already happened. So the scientists, like, it's not the same people, but it's the same thread of research, because when the gateway was closed by Reth and Elia, the traverse between Anima and Thana, which is the second portal, which is what Sravanthi was asking about. The second portal that gets mentioned when Zev and Sasha are listening to the human guards, it was originally the portal between Thana and Anima, and it was closed by Reth and Elia. And so it had been closed at that point, I think about 50 years was what I figured out. I'd have to go back and check, but I think it was about 50 years. So the people that are now on the board and doing the research and the science is not the same people. But the sort of the people that they inherited all of this from are the people that were thwarted by what went on in Anima. And they went out and decided to make Chimera because they couldn't get their hands on the Anima, who they believed were the answer to all of these things. So yes, definitely there's a connection. And somebody asked about Sasha and how she found Anima. So the way the gateway works is that when you're in it, it's not a heart, it's not a personality, it's a function, right? It's a world. And what this world does is identify your core desire and take you there, which sounds great, but when you take out empathy and you take out caution and you take out wisdom and all you're doing is looking at a practical answer. This person wants to go to a place where X happens. Okay, well, X happens here, so we'll go there. But there's no thought or concern for all of the other things that also happen in that place, if that makes sense. So it's a very narrow-minded, that's why Zeb and the Chimera were given such intense warnings about using the gateway, and it's why the team is so careful and doesn't do a lot of exploring with it and stuff like that, because they have come to learn through trial and error that the gateway is not making wise choices, it's not making good choices, it's making 100% black and white choices based on what you desire or what you're seeking. So that might end up really well. You might get into some place that's really awesome. You also might be like Patty, who wanted to be in a place where scientific research was happening and find all the answers to this, that, and the other, and end up in a place where she's getting tortured, you know, because it wasn't part of her request to the gateway to be safe. She just assumed in her mind that if she was in fact, she was thinking of Thana, but she defined it incorrectly. So the gateway didn't identify Thana, it identified another place. But in her mind, she wanted to go to the place where these creatures that had the capacity to, that were sentient and had the capacity to be very useful, were being used and experimented on. And so she got taken somewhere else. So because the humans know this, they're very cautious. They don't just go bowling into the gateway all the time. They do intense training with anybody that they're going to stick through it, which was why it was so... it was actually a very big deal that they let all of the females, even though the females had been through once before, to let them go through with just kind of this little pep talk. It demonstrated the lack of value that those females were seen to have. They were worth the risk, essentially, when Sasha was taking them back. It's why Nick messed with Patty and what she was thinking, because he wasn't intending to send her to her death. He understood, though, that she might disappear forever, and he was willing to take that risk. Basically, it was just a function of everything, right? So the gateway can send people to the wrong places. And because there's two ways it can do it. The gateway, it can be physical, just like the traverses in Anima. There are physical portals into it, right? So Zev and Thana and the humans in the human world, there are physical portals there where you can enter the gateway. And those pathways are always there. They're always accessible. So if you know, like the scientists do, we're in the human world, we want to go to Thana, you can just say, I want to go to that place, and it'll take you because it has this fixed route. But what Sasha discovered and sort of experimented with was recognizing that the gateway had the capacity to take you to a place where there wasn't a physical portal. But what that meant was it was a one-way ticket. So if you asked to go somewhere that didn't have a physical portal, the gateway will drop you there, but the minute you step out, you've got no way to get back. And you don't know unless you walk out in a place that's a physical spot, right? So when Sasha did her thing and kind of had cottoned on to this, or at least wanted to see if it would work, and first she got it to take her to different places in the sanctuary, that was a way for her to get in. But once she knew that that was possible, well, now she can ask it to take her to a world where the humans can't get to it. They can't come interfere. And so the gateway identified Anima as the place where the humans had been thwarted. They could no longer come and go because the path that they knew to it was gone. No one in the human realms, no one in the scientific research had gone on this side. All the places that they had visited had been at least where people had been able to return, had been physical gateways. So I don't know if you guys I've been around some really smart people at different times. And sometimes when you know so much about a thing, it actually limits your assumptions because you're so sure that you understand it that you don't ask the right questions. And that's how I envision that this happened with the team. They went this is how this works. Ooh, this will take us to this place, that place, or the other, so we'll go find it. And every time somebody came out of a gateway in a place where there was no physical gateway, they could never get back. So there was no one to come back and say, actually, this thing does other stuff. Sasha was smart enough to go, if I step out, I can't get back in, so I'm going to stay here. And so she figured that out. The humans have never figured that out. And so the gateway knew this was a place that they can and won't get to. What was interesting to me, and this is just how writer brain works, right? Like I said, when I started the story, never intended to connect the two. I knew that there was a connection physically, that there was a traverse, so the traverse is different to the gateway. The traverse that's in Anima is a spiritual, supernatural place. And there were two of them. There was one into the human world and one into Thana. But the gateway linked the human world and Thana and the human world and Anima. So there's only a traverse between Anima and Thana, but there's gateways between the others. So I knew going in that the original sort of conception of the world was that there was a traverse that Laren and Suli were supposed to discover that was going to take them through, and they were going to meet, not Zev. I didn't have him and Sasha there, but I had the tribes that you see, the clans that you see. Oscar was there. Yet was part of that. So they were supposed to sort of discover this place, learn that the humans were doing something similar with them, and help them thwart that. And then the whole human thing was going to come into Anima, and that was going to be the big blow up. I guess because that was already there, I dismissed all of that. I'd thrown all of that out. That wasn't going to happen anymore, as far as I was concerned. But simultaneously, I'm writing the end of Queen, and I'm writing Alpha. And back in, I think it was March, was when I had to decide where the safe place was going to be. Because I was about to start writing that whole thing of Sasha discovering how it worked and trying to take people to the safe place. And it was literally one of those light bulb moments where I went, well, duh. Because I go, where is safe? Where can the humans not get? Because look what the humans can do. And it was like, ding, 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 ding. So I wasn't lying. I promise you I was not lying at the beginning of the story when I said to you that these were not linked and they were different worlds and the whole thing. That was all true. I wrote right up to Sasha going into the human world. In fact, it was when she came back. Yeah, so her whole experience at the sanctuary, I still didn't know that she was going to end up in Anima. It wasn't until I had to bring her back, Lars and Kiel were reconnected, and she had to explain to Zev where she'd been and what she'd done. And that was when I had to get into the nitty-gritty of how has she actually done this? How has she communicated with Vale? How has she ended up as part of the prophecy when these people don't have this sort of supernatural thing going on? There's no, priests or whatever. That's not part of their culture. I'm like, how did she end up with a prophecy? Oh, I know. So it all kind of came together really late in the game. And then at that point, I have to try and not give a clue, because up to that point, I've been really honest with people and said, no, this isn't a gateway. The gateway is not a traverse. They're not the same thing. These aren't the same worlds, which was true. But now I have to be really careful with my words because I didn't want anybody to guess. And some people still did. I had a couple people early on who were like, wouldn't it be cool if they did this? And a couple people very late in the game who were actually theorizing and like, hey, I think they're going to end up. It was unfortunate about the timing of when Queen ended, which was right as we were getting into this stuff in Alpha. But I love it. I love that my two favorite worlds get put together. So it's, yes, there's a deep connection there. There's a different team, but they're working for the same goal, the same reasons. And probably most importantly, they are actually ending up, the same, I guess the same plot has been thwarted twice by these two different groups of, shape-shifting human beings. So they are very different. They are different species. The Chimera are not Anima, and the Anima are not Chimera. But they serve similar purposes. So one of the hardest questions I got was, why did you kill Yet? So the real truth behind that is, I did not expect Yet to be as central to the story as he was. He was supposed to be kind of a fun character and a tragic figure. He wasn't supposed to carry all the way through. But what happened was, my original plot line was that Sasha and Zeb would enter Thana. Sasha had to learn what had happened to the Chimera, what the humans were doing to them. And one of the things you have to do in storytelling is create stakes. Because people won't care about things unless they can lose them. And people won't get tense or feel deeply about something unless it's at risk. So one of the big things that authors have to do is put things at risk. And the way that you do that is by showing actual consequences within the story, right? Because then it's believable. So the original plot was that Sasha was going to come into Thana. She was going to get to know all the guys, because it was basically only guys. There was only a handful of females. And she and Yet were going to have that initial, that friendship that started right off the bat. And if you go back and you read in those earlier chapters when she's there and she's getting kind of the lowdown, so to speak, at different times, one of the things that they talk about right at the beginning is Zeb lets her know that when Chimera lose their mates, usually they die within 5 years. And that Yet is coming up to that, like he's years into this, and seems less impacted than many of the others. But so what had originally been meant to happen was that she was going to get to know some of these guys, care about them, and one of them was going to die as a result of having lost his mate. And originally that was going to be Yet. So he was only actually going to be there originally. Excuse me. He was supposed to die earlier in the story. And he was supposed to be the thing that made you realize how risky it was for Sasha and Zeb to have an ardent mate bond, because you were supposed to see in real time somebody who had lost their mate and died as a result of it. And even though it's not the same, it was supposed to give the reader that sense of there's real risk here. People die. Like this is legit consequences, right? But because there's two things that happened that changed that. The first was that everybody loved him so much more than I thought they would. I loved him right off the bat. He made me laugh and smile right from the first scene that he was in. But he went deeper with Sasha than I had originally intended for him to go. So there was a reason to keep him there because he was driving a lot of things for her. He was connecting her in ways that she wasn't able to connect because he was no threat, right? Where it shifted was that scene in the cave when Yet's like, oh, don't worry if I see you naked. I find you not at all attractive, which I just thought was really hilarious. This is completely naive about it. He's like, no. I have no sexual attraction to you whatsoever. But when I went through that whole process, the reason I did it with him was because I realized any other male, if there was to be this sort of friendship connection, there was always then going to be this risk of either cheating or somebody wanting to cheat or just somebody, it turns them into a villain. If some nice guy connects with Sasha in any way that allows for anything beyond platonic, it becomes squicky. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted you to see the repercussions of everything without that kind of threat to her and Zeb. So Yet was the natural choice. He's a different species. He's a massive guy. He's very childlike in his way of looking at the world. He's not a romantic hero. He's a friend. He's a teddy bear, right? So he's very safe kind of character for Sasha to get very deeply connected to because he doesn't feel like a sexual character. And then there was the fun that we could have with him being like, ooh, no, you're ugly. Don't worry about me, So there was that aspect to it that let me keep him in the story longer. But also, in the original plotting, they were going to spend a lot more time in Thana, in the village, in the city, before Nick showed up. The idea was that Zev was going to get really sick, and he was going to be so sick that he couldn't help Sasha with the Alpha leading. So she was essentially going to learn the culture and learn the Chimera and learn the city without him. And then as he got better, the humans would show up and it would be this big thing. And I can't remember how or why that changed, but in the writing, it became very clear that no, it was really good actually to get this like moving. And she was going to have to demonstrate her strength by going out into the human world without him while he was sick. And because of that, because we had Nick show up and all the attention shift to what's going on in the human world and how are we going to save Thana from that, it wasn't then the right time to have her walk into the village and discover Yet dying, which was what had originally been meant to happen. Like she was going to actually care about him and then watch him go through this process of losing his life to the love of his mate who was gone. So then I had to figure out, well, he can't not die because I've foreshadowed it literally from the first scene that he shows up, because Zev explains that to her right at the beginning. But also he always had to play that role. That was what he was set up to do. And he had the reason and the motive to do it. So many of them still had hope. As long as they had a mate or the capacity for a mate, they still had hope. It had to be a character that had lost their mate to play that role. And he was the only one that you knew and cared about. All of the others, either their mates weren't dead or they hadn't found him yet. So there wasn't really any other choice. He had to go. But also, I think it wasn't as hard for me because I always knew that's where he was going. And for me, it was really satisfying to see him go in a way that wasn't just him just losing himself. He actually had purpose and intent and strength and courage about it. And I loved that for him. But I get that I had months, I had from this conception knowing that this was going to happen for him, which makes it very different than if you've become connected and not realized that he's going to play that role. I thought that I had foreshadowed enough that people would understand he was not going to live. But I think because we got so engrossed in the human side, I didn't get to reiterate that enough times, or people didn't connect it with him personally. Because even though we talked at different times about people losing their mates and that's why they die, I never connected it to Yet personally, or not very often. And I think that was a failing, and I think I would do that a little bit differently now. But yeah, he had to. There wasn't another option that you would have felt, because we needed to be absolutely clear that the loss of a mate in the Chimera world is the loss of your world, because that then adds value to Zev and Sasha's connection and tension, risk, right? So that was why. And I'm genuinely sorry that that so many, I felt so bad when the comments kept being like, he's going to do this, or this is going to happen, or we're going to have a miracle. And I'm like, no, we're not. I didn't go into it like wanting to hurt people. I didn't go into it wanting to upset people. But I do think that it needed to happen. So maybe I'm being a little bit Nickish in that, means to an end kind of way. But anyway, that was why. Did the team let Nick live after he killed Nathan? So Nick convinced everybody that Zev was the one who killed Nathan, because Nick is good at doing stuff like that. So Nick made them believe that Zev was the one who pulled the trigger, that Zev then had Nick at gunpoint to get out, like, you get us out of here kind of thing. And when they got out to, and the reason that worked was because when they got out to the gateway and they heard the trucks coming, the alarm had been raised that they were all gone, and Nathan had been found. And so Nick runs from, getting them into the gateway, runs back and tells them, panicked, and because he's a really good actor, panicked, and this is what's just happened, and you have to help, and I don't know what we do, and is Nathan okay, this kind of thing. So he had them convinced, at least on the surface level, that he hadn't been the one to kill Nathan. But as he expressed to them, he was already under some suspicion. Like, there was already some discomfort and some wariness with him. That remained, right? So he goes back and sort of feeds the story and gets things to that place where people have at least outwardly accepted that that's what's happened. But he knows that, you know, there's one too many maybes, ifs, ands, or buts here. Like, he's starting to look suspicious, or he was already looking suspicious. He's now starting to look very suspicious. So to my mind, with Zev gone, first of all, his primary driver is gone, because even though he's been a part of this research, the thing that's really kept him engaged so, you know, deeply has been Zev, and wanting Zev to do well and wanting to help Zev thrive. So with Zev gone, that's taken away one of his drivers. And also Nick's the kind of guy who, like, he taught Zev, right? So you saw Zev when he was getting Sasha out. He had a car stashed away at a place where he knew he could get to easily and not be easily followed. That whole team that worked in the sort of assassination covert thing, they've got that whole mentality of, you never know what's going to happen tomorrow. You might have to flee. You might get caught. You might, you know, the police might come for you. So they were all taught by Nick to always be prepared. And so Nick's always had money set aside, another identity set aside, you know, a place to be. He's always sort of had his ducks in a row in case he had to flee suddenly. And to my mind, that's what he did. Once they weren't watching him every second, because things were sort of settling down, but they were still a little suspicious, he just disappeared. He just left. And nobody knew where he went or how. Will the experiments end with Nathan dead and with Zev, Zan, and Sasha gone? Yes and no. The thing that I believe bears out in real life is when there's a big tragedy or a big failure and people are forced to recognize that their own actions kind of brought it about, initially there's usually a pretty good response to that. Most people, when a really bad thing happens, they'll go, wish we hadn't done that, and they'll shift for a time. They'll make all these resolutions that they're going to do things differently, blah, 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 blah. But as the impact and emotion of those kinds of events fades, people fall back into old patterns. And so this is how, for me, this is how these things get conceived, right? I know a guy who, when he was in high school at 17 years old, they were juniors in high school, and there was drunk driving was just a massive, just a almost daily thing in their whole town, in their whole circle. It was just done all the time. And he was a part of a convoy, if you want to call it that left a party, and they were on, I can't even remember where they were going, but there was like 4 or 5 vehicles left at somebody's house and were going. Some of these are all teenagers. And 2 of those vehicles were open back trucks. And he was in the passenger seat of a car behind a truck and watched a drunk driver hit something and his friends be thrown from the truck and killed at 17 years old. And he described to me, now he's in his 20s when I know him, well into his 20s. And what he described to me was, in the initial months after that event, every single person, all the people in town, all the teenagers, the whole high school, like everybody was like, we don't do this, you know, blah, blah, blah. All this resolution, all this intention to change, all these good and useful things, all these practical solutions being put in place, all the support being offered, you know, we're not going to lose anybody else this way, kind of thing. And he said it took about 6 months for the first of his friends, or maybe it was even 4, like it wasn't very long, for the first of his friends that he saw to drive drunk again. And he said it took a little over a year, because he said when they had the memorial event a year later, I think it was, people got drunk afterwards. And from that point on, it just kind of went downhill. And what he described to me, and it's things that I've seen in other areas of life, but this is like a really tangible example. What he described is that as you get space from a really bad event, it's easy to forget the lessons that you learned, and it's easy to go back into what you were. And that was kind of how I envisioned this team and the board and everything. Initially, there's an acceptance of failure. Initially, there's a self-analysis that goes on and says, maybe we didn't do this right, maybe we should have done this differently, and an adjustment is made. And so what I envisioned was that initially they would continue with medical research, but now they're looking for sort of man-made ways to create the same impacts that they were getting from the Chimera. Trying to zero down into what it was about the Chimera and their genetics that was so beneficial to humans, and see if we can replicate that instead of making or building Chimera and using them as a resource, right? So initially they would make the right choice and shift their focus and do other things. But over time, the people leave, people die, different things happen. You lose your emotional impact on what went on before, and they start back into this stuff. So to my mind, it would have stopped it initially, but it wouldn't have stopped it forever. And I'm not saying that to try and like open up a whole nother book world, because I don't have any plans to write any more of those stories about the scientific thing, I mean. But no, I don't believe that it would have stopped it in the long run. These people have been doing this for generations. They've been researching this for centuries, but it's only been with modern medicine and the different things that they can do now, sort of in the last 50 or 60 years, that they were actually able to achieve some of this stuff. Prior to that, it was just this awareness of this other species and using them sort of as a physical tool. But no, I don't believe that the experiments would stop completely. I think they would take a pause, but then they would keep going. Can the Chimera and the Anima live in peace, or will there be conflict, especially between Sasha and Elrith? So if you haven't read the end of Alpha, you just learned. So the safe place for the Chimera is Anima, and it's Anima at the time, about a year, I believe it is, after the end of Queen of Beasts. So the Gateway time traveled them I just realized that my computer is not on mute. It needs to be. The Gateway took them back in time. So Elrith existed a good 50 years or something before Zev, right? But they've gone back. So now Sasha and Zev are in Anima at a time that's technically before they were born. And the question that keeps coming up is, how will Elrith and Sasha, like this came up in a variety of ways. Some people were asking specifically about the dominance factor. Some people were asking specifically about Sasha and Elrith. Some people were asking about the two sort of tribes or clans and how they would, conflict with each other because they're both dominant hierarchy societies, all this sort of thing. So I just kind of combined all of those questions into one. And what I see is, yes, they do, both peoples, both groups have the motive and the capacity to embrace each other. Like, they have the ability and the reason to want to be at peace. So that is achievable between them. But especially at the beginning, a lot of tension and a lot of conflict and a lot of suspicion and great, rife with the opportunity for war kind of thing. But remember, the Chimera are coming in with zero resource. So short of, one-on-one fist fighting, martial arts style war, the Anima are going to win if there's a war, because Anima have weapons and they have city and they just have so many more resources. So that gives the Chimera motive to negotiate peace. Plus, the Anima have just come out of war and they do not have any desire to be at it again. Plus, these are people who, except for Sasha, are of a like. They recognize it. If you've read that scene when Zev scents Elrith at first, he's like, she can shift. Like, he can tell that she's, he says she's Chimera or similar of that ilk, because he recognizes that her scent is different than one of theirs, but it has similarities to it. It's recognizably a human who's got the capacity to shift into an animal. So they have reason to trust each other as well. There's something similar about them. And so now we have to sort of figure out how we're going to make this work, right? So yeah, a lot of tension between them. But the capacity is there to live at peace. I think it was Janelle. Somebody asked if Zan is really human. And so I would say Zan definitely doesn't shift. He's not becoming an animal, but he's what I would call human plus. he's not simply human. There's definitely some of, he's his father's son. There's some senses and capacities there that go beyond the norm for a human. He's not going to grow up to be just the guy down the street, but he's also not a shifter. Will the females who were sterilized be healed by Anima? This was a question, again, I got in 2 or 3 different ways, so I'm rephrasing and kind of combining them. Yes and no. It will depend why they were sterile. Because I always imagined that there was more than one way that they became sterile or barren. Some of them, like May and like Kiel, can't have offspring because of physical things that were done to them or things that were botched. Things that, it wasn't that the humans obviously had no desire to sterilize Chimera, at least not good ones. But because it's experimentation and because sometimes they're doing things, and sometimes just because people make mistakes. Some of the Chimera females who can't reproduce aren't physically capable of reproducing. So it won't matter how healthy they get, they'll never reproduce. They don't have the goods anymore to do that. But other ones, I imagine, are more like animals that get taken into zoos and things like that, where there's a lot of times when they're in an unnatural place, their bodies, the stress and the toxicity of that, their bodies kind of shut down in some ways. And they can't reproduce, not because they're not physically capable, but because there's other things, hormonal things and whatever going on. So some of the females are in that place. They're what the humans would call barren. It's not that there's a physical barrier to them having offspring. It's that they just don't conceive. And for those ones, yes, there is at least for some of them, going into Anima, being free, getting over the trauma, or not getting over, but recovering from the trauma and the stress of the constant threat of the humans. With time, they would be able to have offspring. So it's a mixed bag. Who was the Dark Alpha? It's called Rise of the Dark Alpha. Was that Sasha or Zev? It's Zev. The reality is that Zev, in his own mind, is very dark. Or was. Certainly when, the thing that I never got to show you, I had hoped to give you flashbacks, but it just never, the story never really went in the right direction. If you got to see scenes of Zev prior to reconnecting with Sasha, so between when he left and when he meets her again, especially sort of the 6 months to a year immediately before that, there was some really dark stuff going on for him. Like, he was in a bad place mentally and physically, and just the things that he was doing and being a part of were not natural to him. So he had to be in this very dark place to do them. And I always intended, and didn't deliver, but I always intended that you would see him kind of wake up out of this darkness. But what ended up happening was just being back with her and coming back to that place of safety emotionally with her, and the reunion and the joy that they got from being together kind of, I don't want to say it healed his darkness, but it was more that his goodness came out too quick. So I didn't get, because initially, if you read the very first scene, I think it's from his perspective, when they're under the stairs, because the car is circling around Sasha and he's trying to get her out because he knows it's the team that's coming for her. If you read that, if you go back to him in that place when he's still kind of in the covert spook mentality, he was supposed to start a lot harder and a lot more closed off. And in that first scene, he's a lot more like externally shut down. You get in his head, you know that he's got feelings and whatnot. But if you imagine how that kind of played out externally, he's not being super expressive. He's not, initially my conception of him was that he was very, he had big walls up and was very shut down emotionally, because he had to be for the stuff that he was doing, and that she was going to draw him back out into the sort of sweetness that he'd had when he was young. But that just kind of happened. It just kind of happened, being around her, and his need to protect her right off the bat, because she gets taken back to Thana, and then there's the immediate threat. His sweetness just came out, and so I never got to really show you his dark side. But it's there. Like, the reason he has such trauma, and the reason he struggles to be, enclosed in spaces and all of that, is not because terrible things were done to him. It's because he was manipulated into doing terrible things, and he has a deep conscience about it. So, but there was already so much dark and awful things that we kind of had to face with this. I didn't want to throw another layer into that. It didn't seem like we needed it. So this is both the advantage and the disadvantage of a serialized novel, is that, things change as you go, and you can just run with it. So I did. The Zev you got is not the Zev that I initially created in my mind. He evolved very quickly. Did you always know you were going to take Chimera to Anima? I already kind of explained all of that, I think. But I'll tell you how I now, like, what my notes were on how this all happened. So no, I didn't. I can't remember if I talked about this in Discord or here. I did not initially intend to unify the two worlds. That was not my goal when I started the book. And in fact, it wasn't my goal until about 3 or 4 months ago. But what I knew was that there was that link, that sort of foundational link of the same human thread coming through, even though it wasn't the same people, that goal, that initial plot from the human beings to try and use the Chimera or the Anima and then the Chimera. So there was a link. I always knew that there was that link. But what I imagine okay. If you haven't read King of Beasts, I think it's only King that this is going to mess with, but if you haven't read King of Beasts and you plan to, you might want to switch off for 5 minutes. Because I'm going to tell you some things that get discovered, like in the second and third volume of that story. So, when Gari and Callie discovered that the humans had once been part of Anima, and that the disformed and how and why they existed had been obscured intentionally. What I imagine happened was the human tribe, there used to be humans in Anima as they are, just normal humans. They were a tribe within Anima. The supernatural prophecy was given that the humans were going to become a threat to the Anima. And that the Anima people and the Anima land needed to be protected from them. And that already in that place, the protectors already existed because the wider human world on the other side of the traverse was a resource to them. So they were already aware. So those are the human beings that everybody believes is going to be the threat, right? So they're already aware of protectors. They're already aware of a human threat. The guardians were originally the human tribe, because they love Anima. They love the Anima people. They love the Anima land. They want to save it. So they sacrifice their own future, so to speak, by moving to the human world to stand between, right? So very similar to what Sasha's, I hadn't actually made that connection until just a second, but very similar to Sasha's assurance to Zev, that what she realized was she could see things from a human perspective that the Chimera couldn't see. So she had the capacity to sort of do things differently. So it's similar to that. The human tribe says, we need to stand between. We need to be the barrier that stops humanity from discovering and or threatening Anima. So they become the guardians. And in order to fix that, because humans know that their life's not going to be as good in the human world as it is in the Anima world. And they know that later generations that didn't receive the prophecy directly are probably not going to believe it and all that kind of stuff. So they basically put themselves under a vow with the intention that it will stop future generations from breaking this agreement where we're going to go be the guardians. We're going to protect the Anima from the humans. But what it becomes is a curse because it gets kind of twisted over time. And it becomes this sort of, we'll give ourselves to the dark if we don't stay in the light kind of thing. So it wasn't good what happened there with the guardians. But initially, it was a genuinely noble move that the human tribe made to go. And so all of the guardians are descended from that original tribe that left Anima. But obviously over time and generations, and this is all happening hundreds of years earlier, over time and generations on the human side, some people, because the guardians are passing on this lore and they're passing on this knowledge and they have the histories and all this sort of stuff, some of this gets leaked here and there at different times. Some of the human descendants aren't good people and want, this utopia that they think that this place is. Let's see if we can, make money off of this or whatever. There's a lot of reasons why people will get greedy or selfish or whatever and become destructive. So the ones that wanted to exploit Anima, the ones that are aware of Anima and want to exploit it, become a problem. Separate from the guardians, because the guardians are still resolved to stand between. They become, later on, over time, the team, the scientists, the people. So these are people that have a knowledge of the truth, which is that there's this other world that exists, these other types of people that exist, and they can be of great benefit to us. But they twist it, and they're not going to protect that. They're going to try to exploit it. So the human tribe that existed hundreds of years earlier in Anima is now effectively split at this time and place, split into both noble and ignoble groups. And that's how, so the legend of Anima, so to speak, or the knowledge of Anima got passed down, and over generations, some of the human beings that were descended from this group or whatever, they are determined to try to use this. And they become, with time and technology and industry and all of that, it opens up doors, and then science starts to catch up, and they can clone and different stuff like this. All of that people get fascinated and they get fixated and they stop thinking about the repercussions and they start just thinking about what they can get from it. And to me, that's how this all evolved. So the reason it stayed a secret is because the same people that want to exploit it don't want other people to be able to exploit it. So they keep it to themselves, which is in one way does keep anima safe. But on the other, they are the ones that can then turn around and do damage. So to my imaginings, roughly-ish 50 years ago, Yet comes through, so the traverse is closed between Anima and Thana. There's no way for the scientists to get through there now. The only people that can pass that now are protectors, and they're not going to. They don't want to be in the human world. So that gateway, or the humans call it a gateway, the Anima call it a traverse, that's closed. It's done. Yet, as a Bigfoot Yeti in Thana, loses his mate. Well, years ago when he was younger, before his mate, he gets discovered. He goes into the human world because he's curious. He's like a kid. He's the curiosity killed the cat thing, right? He goes through to the human world through the gateway, gets discovered, gets followed back. And that's also Thana is where Peg was from. That's how there's that whole connection. That was why I was always really careful about talking about Peg, because Rika is from an earlier iteration of what the team in the sanctuary is now. And so she had been through Thana and befriended Peg. He's a creature. He's one that was made by the scientists, but 50 years ago, right? So this is back when the Thanos first been started to be used as a resource, first been discovered, and all this stuff is going on, and the scientists are there, and this is at the beginning of the end, of Queen, when I'm getting turned around in my head now. The team is at that point aware of both. That's how the humans were getting through to Anima. Then it gets closed, right? And so everything sort of shuts down for a while. Nobody knows what's going on. It gets out of circulation, then Yet gets discovered and brings them back in. That was how it worked. So it's actually more than 50 years since Queen ended, but it's 50 years since Thana was essentially rediscovered. So, when the sorry, I have to look at my notes here. Right, so when the traverses were closed by Reth and Elia, all of the humans that were in Anima were either killed or kept out, like basically banished until they died. So everybody eventually died, but they were never allowed to sort of establish. The few humans that they believed weren't bad were never allowed to become established as a tribe, right? They just kind of lived among them or were banished out. They lived out their lives, but they died. But the humans, because obviously not every single scientist and whatever came through for that whole thing, there were plenty of people still left in the human world that knew what had happened, or at least knew that something had happened because the traverse closed, but they didn't know what. They just knew that they'd been defeated, right? So there's still a core left in the human world, and now they can't get into Anima. So they are trying to replicate Chimera. They make the Chimera trying to replicate the Anima because they know of them and they've studied them and they have some notes, they have different evidences and whatever. I don't know all of the science behind it. I just imagine labs and data and, but this is all 50, 70 years ago. So it wasn't to the same depth that they would have it now. And before you say they didn't have those technologies 50 or 70 years ago, I'm a firm believer that there's always, technology itself is always a good several decades ahead of what we have accessible to us, in front of us. Because if you read any of the things like, say, from back in the 50s and 60s, there was technology existing back then that most of us wasn't even aware existed, because they were developing it. So all of those innovations and stuff were happening in secret. And then when they kind of figure them out and they can monetize them, then it comes out into the world. And back in those days, there used to be long periods of time between the discovery of things and the actual, function. It happens a lot faster now. But I always imagined that these were the people that were at the cusp of that. They were the government and the businesses and the really super rich people, the conspiracy theory stuff. These are the people that know the things that nobody else knows. And they are the people that were developing this stuff. So the technology that they had at the end of Queen, so I imagine Zev and Sasha are a little bit ahead of us in time. But the point is that they had things available to them that the general run-of-the-mill humans didn't. And anyway, so that's part of the thing. So once the Traverse was closed, they tried to create the Anima, and they developed the Chimera. And when they got to Zev, this is the one. Like, this is what we've been trying to achieve for 50 years, right? So he's the one that becomes now the model. All of their goals for future are to replicate this, which is why Lars is pretty close to him in age and stuff like that. So that's kind of the way that the lore connected the two. And then you enter the story with Zev and Sasha, and you see, his life has been completely ruled by these people. And you see what happens. He becomes the answer to the revolution, or she does. So I'm almost done. I just want to check something. Okay. Yeah. Almost done here. Got one more question that I'm going to answer. And then we'll get into some of the extra stuff. Two more questions, technically. So the first was, can I list the favorite moments in Alpha like I did with Queen of Beasts? So if any of you were here for the end of Anima a few weeks ago, I got asked what was my favorite point in the story, and I couldn't sort of be just like this one. So I've made a list again, but I will go through them fast. In the first couple of chapters, that first time when Zev and Sasha are actually physically together and they both know that they're with the other, even though it passes really quickly and you don't get to see everything that's going on there because you don't yet know all of the history between them. I love that moment of them under the stairs and him trying to protect her and her freaking out and realizing that it's him. People go on and on when they first read the book about how Sasha is so stupid and why she's so hung up on this thing that he left because he didn't need to leave and da-da-da. And I'm thinking, put yourself in her shoes. This guy's been gone for 5 years. Like, he's the love of her life. She met him when she was a teenager. She's never been able to let go of that. And he's been gone for 5 years. That's intense when she's suddenly back, and it's why she's so hesitant at the beginning to sort of trust what's going on, because she still doesn't fully understand why he left in the first place. And his intensity about it, he never wanted to go, and now he's finally sort of giving in to this urge that he's always had to return to her. So that interaction between the two of them, even though it's not, they're not actually talking to each other, they're both kind of freaking out. But I love that moment, that the electricity of that moment when they're reunited for the first time. I love Yet and the honeypot jokes. I love Yet's combination of naivety and sort of mischievousness in that. It still makes me giggle sometimes when I think about the honeypot jokes, or the honey jokes. The moment Sasha became Alpha, I can still remember that was another one of those lightning bolt moments. Like, I was sitting with my husband talking about the story, and I literally went, "Oh, I know what I did." He's like, "What?" So her becoming Alpha was not part of the original plot. It was something that I developed when I think the story was, we were pretty well into it, because I had to, the reason I was thinking about it was I had to the next day work out how I was going to get them from Zev beating Tsar to them getting to the Solitude. And I still hadn't worked out the logistics of Zev taking over as Alpha. And I can't remember, there was some barrier. The reason that wasn't easy, there was some detail that I had put in place that made that not just be an easy flip. And that was when the idea came about Sasha taking it instead. I love the Solitude. Like, if I could only read like a few chapters of the book in perpetuity, it would be the Solitude. I love the two of them there. And it's not just because of the sex. It's what that means, because for them, this is the culmination of literally years of loving each other and not being able to be together. And on top of that, it's just intense, the intensity of their desire to be together. Like, to me, the fun parts of writing honeymoon type situations is there's no distractions. You have every reason to just put these two together and do whatever they want to do, because there's no external conflicts or distractions. And I love those times when they get to just wallow in each other. So I love that phase in any story, but for whatever reason, it's particularly meaningful or intense with Zev and Sasha. So I love the Solitude. Even though it's not a nice moment, the moment when Zev, who's very ill and in and out of consciousness, realizes that Sasha's going to the human world without him, for him, it's super intense and it's super terrifying. And he ends up kind of sort of, I don't want to say fighting with the guys, but he's struggling with Lars and the guys at one point. I don't know why, or I do know why. There's an intensity to his feelings there that you can't really get across on the page without going into this massive info dumps. But I remember envisioning that scene before I wrote it and feeling the intensity of his feelings there, and his fear and desire to get between her and this danger. And I really love that. This one isn't so much about the story, but just the whole, this is about the writing of it. And the introduction of Ernie and everybody's change in their response to him. Like, I talked about that on Discord, but that going from why did you bring a spider here? We don't want a spider. And everybody being oohed and grossed out and freaking out, and moving to everybody going, where's Ernie? We need more Ernie. Bring back Ernie. That was just a real, I call it an author fist pump moment. The scenes where Sasha's getting the females organized in the breeding arena and getting them onto the bus. I love her determination in those scenes. She's absolutely resolved to get these women out of there. And I just love her heart in that. I love Zev and Sasha sneaking off to the hot pools after she's come back to Thana. And that comes along into the Solitude too. It's that relief of being together and united and away from other people. Just the peace of that and the joy of that. I love the moment when Lars realizes Kjell is coming for him, like really wants to be with him, like the stunned shock first, and then is this really happening, you know, that whole thing. Honestly, that was probably my favorite moment to write in the whole book. Not because I care more about them than Zev and Sasha, but I think because it was such a payoff after for being in Lars's head, because I love writing Lars, and watching and just knowing how destroyed he was, thinking that she was just never gonna accept the bond. that whole, the sunshine of that moment when she comes for him. I love that. I wish I could have taken you with Sasha through the gateway, coming back to Thana, and that whole process of her discovering, testing and trying out. Like, she took some real risks there, and it was very frightening for her. But it was also that cool payoff of, I wish we could have shown that in scene. I couldn't do it because it would ruin the reveals later. But it would be so cool to let you see, because I had to sort of envision it all in my head, and the whole thing of her and Vale kind of figuring out how this worked and what we're going to do about it and all of that. I just wish you could have seen that. I love Zev and Sasha in the hot pools before Horton comes to them, like when they're hiding from the humans. And somebody said to me in one of the other books, I think it was in Forbidden Prince, somebody was like, "You got a thing for water." I do. I don't know why. I love those scenes. There's something very sensual about being in water together. Anyway, I love that scene. And another one that I feel like, because of the plot, you didn't get enough of it. I love the scene where Sasha, for the first time, sees Zev holding Zan. Because it happens very quickly and very briefly. But I love that for her, that moment of seeing him be a dad for the first time, even though for both of them, it's just this kind of, I just love that. I know how much of a draw that is the first time I got to see my husband with our son and stuff. There's just something really super special about that. I wish I could have shown you more about Zev's heart shift when he realized that so many of the bad things that had happened in his life were the vehicle for him for the very best things. So he gets very briefly talk about with Sasha, where Sasha basically comes to him right at the end and is like, we can't go into this seeing with you still believing that you're condemned and that you're damned and that this is all wrong. And he gets to say to her, no, I see it now. But it's happening in such a pressured time and environment that I didn't get to show you for him how that all kind of clicked into place and how he got to go from seeing all of these negative things that had happened in his life as curses, right? God doesn't care about me. God doesn't like me. These things wouldn't have happened to me if he did. That was where he started. I'm damned and God's not going to help me. And this is why these bad things are happening. And for him to then shift perspective and see, no, those bad things that happened were the vehicle for the best things in my life. And without those bad things happening, I wouldn't have Sasha and I wouldn't have Zan and we wouldn't be going to the safe place. The click for him when that happened healed a great deal of his, I don't want to say it healed his trauma, but it healed this hole in him, which is going to allow him to live very differently in this new world. And I have to say, probably the most satisfying sentence I wrote in this entire book, I kid you not, was when Elrith says, "I'm the queen of this realm. Who the fuck are you?" Because when that came to me, like when I realized if I'm bringing Zev and Sasha into Anima, the easiest and most impactful way to show that is to have them meet the main character there, so that it would just be this, boom moment. And it just made me giddy. I mean, it was just a total creative moment. It just, the first time I saw the scene in my head, like the idea, I got goosebumps. And that line, it had to be that line. That line had to be the last line. And I just loved it, and I still love it. because again, I can see both characters from their individual perspectives with no knowledge of each other. Anyway, I just love that. I love that moment. I know that I've forgotten important moments in the story, but those are the ones that jump out at me when I think about it and when I look back on it. But if there are other moments or other scenes that you think about or want to know more about or wonder about or whatever, please do feel free in the Amy's cohort group, which is the secret group where I'm going to post the extra content. Please feel free to ask questions in there. Even if it's not to do with the extra content, even if it's the stuff because we can't go back and forth because I can't answer your comments. I'm sorry, I didn't think about that when I set this up with my phone, that was going to limit how much I could see of what you're saying. So if you have questions, please feel free to post them in there. Just be patient with me. I might not be able to answer them all right away, but I really want to discuss the end of the story with you guys and not just tell you my ideas. I want to hear yours. So the last question was, are you going to write anything that shows the Chimera and the Anima together? So 2 things. I have plans, although not short term, I do have plans to do side stories on both Queen and Alpha. Side stories are the technical term for when we add a chunk of extra content at the end of a completed book. We can only do it one time. The system will only allow us to add content one time, which is why the extra content that you're going to get for free, that everybody else is going to get in a few days, I can't get the book marked completed in the system until then, because once I do that, I'm done. I can't add anything else to the whole story. So I do have plans probably later this year to add some stuff just for fun to both Queen and Alpha. So you will hopefully in that get to see those main characters kind of, having a moment, one moment or another, that involves, the sudden thrown togetherness of the 2 cultures. So yes, I do plan to do that. But I also have some extra content that I think you're gonna hopefully be pretty interested in from that perspective. You're gonna see 3 chapters tonight. So the first piece of extra content is 2 chapters as an epilogue. If you were in the Reader Tribe a month or so ago, and I said to you, what would you like as extra content after the story? And you guys voted for Lars and Kjell. So you're gonna get that in a little over an hour. It's going to post in the group, in the secret group. Well, it's called Amy's Cohorts. Sorry, I'm going longer than I was supposed to, and so now my husband's vacuuming. We're almost done. And then, so you're going to get the 2 chapters that are the epilogue for Lars and Kjell, and then you're going to get 3 chapters half an hour later that are extra content that I'm not going to tell you about. But I'd love to hear what you think of it when it comes out. So you can comment on the post, either in Discord or in Facebook, or you can start your own discussion. If there's a specific aspect to it that you want to talk about in general, please feel free to post in the group so that we can all talk about it. I'm really eager to see what you think. And don't forget that you're being a member of those secret groups is an entry. So if you are at Discord and in Facebook, you have 2 entries for giveaways. If you're at one or the other, you still get an entry for giveaways. That's going to include Zev merchandise, Thana merchandise, and the books, my copies of my actual paperback books that are not related to these stories. I think what I'll do with those ones, because I know not everybody will be interested in those, is in the groups themselves, I'll post a thing so that if you're interested in going into the draw for those ones, you can enter. So then I'm not sending it to somebody who doesn't want to read it. But I think that's it. I think that's it. I think that's our stuff. And I wish that I could see you better. Sorry, I'm trying to see if everybody's getting the link to the Oh yeah, so if you're in here now and you haven't yet gotten the link to the secret group, please comment right now and tell. I was supposed to take breaks. I'm sorry, guys. I told the moderators that I was going to take a break here and there and say, hey, if you want to be in the secret group, you need to, so they could do it, and I didn't. Oh, I can see. Okay, so Rosalind said, will you be writing an update with Gar and Rika? I imagine that when I do a special for Queen, it will update you on all the characters, all the main characters. So that would be Elrith and Aaron, Gar and Rika. Yeah, maybe just those 4. I'm not sure. But yes, I would imagine that you will see more from Gar and Rika. And I think that's all. Is there any other like last minute? Melissa and Nikki need the link for the new group. And just so you guys know, with this group, this is going to become, what I had done previously in Discord was that I had a special chat room that was just for privileged readers. And I didn't like separating out that way. So now, from now on, what I'm going to do is whenever you come to one of these live events, you'll get added. If there's any extra content, you'll get into this group, and you'll stay there. So you're there now. So you get to stay there, even if you're not at the next live. If there's stuff that comes up, you'll get to be there and see it. So this is like a the new group, the one that's got the extra content in it tonight, is called Amy's Cohorts. The group that everybody's in is called Amy's Author Tribe. So people are talking and I can't read it, and I wish that I could. I'm going to end up coming back in here tonight and answering a bunch of these comments that I didn't get to see while I was talking. I'm so sorry. What did Elle think of the creatures when they came over from Anima? Well, that's something that I got to show you. I can just tell you because it's way more fun to see it. I'm going to have to get off here because my husband is vacuuming, and that is the unspoken way to tell me that I have gone much longer than I said I would, which I have a habit of doing. You might have noticed. And I don't want you guys to have to listen to that either. So I'm going to get off here. I'm probably not going to be able to do it right now, but I am going to try and get in tonight and look at all the comments through the chat, and I'll try and answer them. What I'll probably do is answer them in the group rather than, like in the new group, rather than on the comment thread here, because then it just becomes a whole mask of my text. So I'll try and pick some out. If either I don't have time or if I miss your comment or something, please feel free, like I say. If you have a burning question, go into the Amy's Cohort group, create a post, and ask your question. I will get to all of them eventually, even if I don't do it tonight. And if you have after a week, please. I mean, that's what these places are for. I love talking to you guys about this stuff. I'm sad that these books are ending, so it's fun for me to be able to come in and still talk about these characters and still be with them. Because otherwise it's just done. And that's really sad. For those of you who have been with Zev from the beginning, you've been reading this book for 8 months. Like, we're days away from 8 months. Literally days. When the stuff posts, I think on the 14th, I'm pretty sure Zev's first chapter was on the 17th of October last year. So we've gone from the 17th of October through to June 14th. Isn't that crazy? Time goes really quick. And it's also like 500,000 words or more. Actually, I'm going to look that up because I forgot. It had over 2 million views. And, oh, I'm in the wrong place. Sorry. This is just going to take me 1 second. Over 2 million views, 533,000 words, and 479 chapters. And I'm about to add 7 chapters. Oh, but 3 of those chapters in the middle are just the short written answers to the questions that we've gone over in the lives. Don't buy those. Don't pay for them because you're not going to get anything new from that. I literally made my notes like paragraphs, and posted them for people who couldn't be at the lives or weren't going to watch a video. So if you do watch this later and you're going into the web novel stuff, read the first 2 epilogue chapters, skip the next 3 that are the Q&As, and then go into the extra content at the end. All of that's going to post on Web Novel, and it's either tomorrow night or the night after, but you're not going to get anything new there. That's why I'm giving it to you guys in the group privately. And then too, if I've really screwed something up, you can tell me, and then I can correct it before it goes out to everybody else. So if you see any major issues, let me know. Okay, I really do have to go. It's been really awesome. I really appreciate that you guys show up and stick with me for all this time. And I appreciate that you ask such great questions that I get to answer, like for real. So please don't ever stop doing that. If you have been only in the web novel books and you're looking for something new now that Alpha's done, I have 2 more stories. One is on Dream, one is on Novel Star. The Dream book is called His Stolen Luna. It's a werewolf tale, modern werewolves. The one on Nova/Fantasia is called Fated for the Demon Slayer, and it's a contemporary urban fantasy. So that's the real world, but with a fantasy world mixed into it. Supernatural. Angels and demons. Anyway, I really appreciate you guys. I'm so thankful that you care so much about my characters and give me an opportunity. I've been looking forward to this and being able to share this stuff with you for months. So please, any questions I haven't answered, please post them in the group. Love to have the chance to answer them. And if I don't, it's only because you're going to get content that's going to answer it. So love you. I'm grateful for you. And I will talk to you again, hopefully soon. Hopefully we get to do this again soon. I'll talk to you later. Bye.